Hello, welcome. Today we're talking again with Seth Rubenstein from the Pew Research Center. If you didn't watch our previous video, I invite you to watch it. It was a lot of fun. Seth went into how they are using the Interactivity API to really create a wonderful experience for editors in the platform. It was for search, for quizzes and polls and other things, and it's all very exciting. So today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what's possible with the Interactivity API and how you might want to structure things to make it easier for you as a developer, designer, or even the editorial team to work with the platform. Welcome, Seth.
Hello.
Last time, we were looking at some of your exciting views within the editor itself, both for search, for the facets part of it, and for the quizzes, and even for the charts and the tables, which is all very exciting. So, a few questions came up while I was rewatching the video, and some of these are related to the Interactivity API, some are not, but let's get started with the ones that are. So, my main question is when you were showing me your screen inside the editor, you had this little toggle that enabled
hmm
interactivity for a specific block, which I think is a great idea. I had never thought to do it that way because when you're starting to work with the interactivity API, first you have to get sort of the gist of it. And then once you figure it out, everything is sort of in the code. But just exposing that as a toggle so that it's free for people to
hmm
decide to use it as interactive or not, I think was like a golden idea. How did that come about? How did you decide to enable that
So
little
the
toggle?
first thing that we built when we were exploring the interactivity API, we built one kind of custom block. You click on it, it fired up a alert just to see what it would do. The other test was how could we take over existing blocks, specifically core blocks, and even more specifically core button, and how can we kind of add interactivity to it? When we started doing that, we realized, well, not every button needs to be an interactive button. Some of them are just going to be links. And so
Hmm.
it was
Mm-hmm.
just that simple. It was just, well, sometimes a block is going to be static. It's just going to have one thing it does, you click on it, and there you go. And it's not going to be interactive. And so that's where that really came out of, is that we need to have, some of these blocks are going to be interactive, but they're also going to fall back to kind of a more static state.
When you started that exploration, did you initially extend core blocks to add that sort of interactive
hmm
functionality to them, or what were you
Yeah, so
doing?
we really only focused on core button, just because it made the most sense. Our primary kind of focus was getting some form elements together. We wanted to be able to make login forms and registration forms and all sorts of other forms. And so having a button was key. So core button was really the only core button or core block that we focused on adding interactivity. And that's pretty simple to do. We just used PHP filters to add, supports interactive true to the block, and then we changed the markup on a render block filter.
And so at that point, you're adding interactivity to the
hmm
button, and is that specifically for like use in forms? How does that relate to its surrounding
Yeah, I
items?
guess it's better to say that we add interactivity support to core button rather than adding
Mm-hmm.
interactivity. Um, you know, in that panel, one of the other things that's in there beside the little checkbox that says this interactive is this field for target namespace. It's
Mm-hmm.
that really is probably the most important field there, because that's what tells you click on a core button, you give it a namespace, and it says, oh, this button should use this interactive namespace for its on-click handler. Um, that's really, I think, the kind of the magic of kind of our atomic interactive block system. And that's how
Mm-hmm.
core button does things in our uses. So if we put it into a login form, we set its namespace to the login form, and the login form has a function on click. When you click on the button, it runs that function.
Mm-hmm.
You put core button in another form, registration. You set it to its namespace. The registration form tells the button when you click on it, do this thing. And so really it is these kind of higher level interactive block applications that are informing these sub blocks like core button and other kind of homegrown blocks, what they should do when you're inside of this block.
I see. So do you have, for the forms, for example, for the login form, is that a custom block that you created that has fields and then, or can have fields, and then you just use the core button inside it so you don't create your own button? And then you just tell it what the namespace is going to be for that matches that one. So in this case, I think we're going to get to that big question of context versus state. So here we're talking about context, where the button, are you getting it, the namespace of the, let me ask this, try to make it in a clear way. So does the form, the custom form or custom block for the form, does that have its own, like, I don't know, MailChimp or login namespace, right? Or PwC login, right? And then as you use the button, when you enable interactivity support, do you give it the namespace of that one because it's going to be contained within it and it's going to its ancestors?
Yes.
So are we using context?
Well,
then?
it's a mix of multiple things, really.
Okay.
So I guess there's really three kind of things that you can use in the toolbox to communicate across blocks on a page. With the Interactivity API, we have state and context. And also confusingly, on the server side, we have block context, right? So server side blocks can share information with each other and they can pass down values and so on and so forth. You can kind of do the same thing with the interactivity context, which is like React state, except it's very specific to that one instance of a block. So 5 button blocks on a page, right? They might be in a login form and a registration form. And the login form and registration form will have state. They will have interactive state because, well, there should only be one login form or one registration form on a page. If there were multiple login forms on a page, they would share all the same state. So any values you put in there would be shared. Context is specific to that one block. So let's say you have 2 login forms. Well, that button, if it has its own block context, its own interactive context, it's going to only have values for that one instance. So those 2 blocks, those 2 instances of a button block, for example, would have their own kind of context state. This is where it does get confusing, I think, with the Interactivity API. I can kind of show some, I think, examples to illustrate this, if that would be helpful. Okay.
That would be good. Yeah.
Let me share. So, let me share my browser. Okay, great. Okay. So, context. I thought this might be a good example of this. Let me open up something like this, right? Okay, so this is a simple post for us, a simple report. You see 2 blocks here. These are interactivity powered blocks. They're just little collapsibles. And if we go inspect this real quick, you are going to see dataset context. It's got a little ID and a simple is open, true or false, right?
Okay.
So if this was state, both of these blocks would share that value. That's a problem, right? We don't, if I click on is open here, I don't want the other one to be is open. So
of course,
to give an idea of state, we do, this is a good example of kind of atomic blocks. This is a promo block with a MailChimp form. And inside the MailChimp form is a form field, a form input text block and a button block. Let me show you that real quick. Let's open this up. There we go. Okay, so you'll see here. Just open up this pattern. Okay, so here's our promo. This is our MailChimp form block. This is the block that has interactivity. Okay. This is a text field block in here. You'll see it's got the namespace PRC block MailChimp form.
For the, so that it knows about its actions and callbacks and everything, right? Okay.
And then here we have button. It also says PRC block MailChimp form. And we have a small CAPTCHA block too. that works that way. So when we go back to the home page, so the way this works is all of our form blocks, form input field, core button, etc., they use state. The reason for that being, let's say, and I have a good example of it here. Let's say you want to capture someone's email address. They're entering their email address on one sign-up form, but you want to make it easy for them to quickly sign up for all the others, right? Well, by using state for the input block, we can share those values across interactive instances, right? We can be in one block and say, store PRC block MailChimp form, whatever values. And we can get those across instances because state is shared at a higher level across the page, whereas context is kind of instanced to that block.
Right.
So let's say this button has context. I can't access the context for that button over here.
In the other one.
I mean, you maybe could, but it's very difficult and it's not like foolproof. Whereas I can access the state for this. So what we do is we use WP Interactivity State, which is a PHP function, and we say here's the target namespace for the thing, and then we give it kind of a randomized ID so that each of these elements can be in state on the page so that we can access them. So what that means is, as I type in an email address here, you'll see down here it also is getting filled in, and that's because this is form input text with a name of email. So it has a very specific ID.
Within
this is also form
form
input text with an ID of email.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can see here how they can kind of interoperate with one another while also having separate kind of applications entirely, right? This doesn't share the same state with this.
Right.
I still need to come over here and say, actually, yeah, I am going to sign up for this one email. I mean, they're the same email, but you get the idea.
Right. So the fields are sharing the state, but the button itself is using just the action for the context of that individual form.
So when to use context, when to use state, there is no rules for this. It is what you need. So what we have found, I think, with kind of atomic blocks is that it does make sense to make your most atomic blocks to have state so that to use state for their values and things so that you can interact with them in other interactive applications on the page pretty easily. If that makes sense, I hope that helps.
Yes. No, it does. It does. So just for anyone listening, the context is localized to that block, for example, or maybe it's ancestors, right? And then state is if you want to do it like here, where they're completely separate, but you still want to share state among them, and then you might want to use the value in one or another place, like in the demo of the trailers where they have the little like button and you want to show how many likes at the top. They're using state.
Yes.
They don't have to be within a special container.
Right.
And that's what sort of brought up the question from last time where you showed me you had the facets provider. And I was wondering, okay, so do we need to add a provider in the whole page, or is it because we're trying to sort of localize scope, right? And so that's what initially brought up these questions.
Sure.
Which is actually a follow-up. If you could use context, so we've explained context and state, right? If, say, you're using context because you're inside something else, and you can because it's an ancestor, right? Because you have a container or something. Let's say you have that maybe in your facets one. Would there be a reason to try to keep it as scoped as possible? Like maybe you have subsections in a form or something. Would you at some point try to have context that's just localized to a smaller unit instead of the whole thing?
Yes, and I can show you an example of that. There are good use cases for that too. So let me just dive into our user account system. This is entirely comprised of blocks. So we'll go to the first page here, which is the login page. And let me just open up our whole profile page. So here we see user accounts controller. What this really does is it has some query bars and some rewrites, and it just, based on what URL you hit on this page, we're going to load one of these blocks. Okay. So if you hit /profile /login, it's going to load the login form. If you hit the page profile /registration, it's going to load the registration form, and so on and so forth.
Oh, the same page. It just has
the same page, but just a different,
dynamic
we're loading a
queries.
specific block.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we look at, really, login is a good example. Password. Password's a very interesting field because it does something. It's not dumb. You don't just put a password in here and that gets hoisted up to the higher level context. We're going to be doing things like checking your values. Do they meet our requirements? Are they the same? So where we're doing the password registration or reset, this uses context in of itself, but then it does communicate what you're setting as your password higher up to the higher level application. In this case, reset password kind of is its own thing. So here, form input email is just a visual kind of thing, and here's the actual input block, and you'll see its namespace is PRC user accounts reset password. If we come down here to the actual password field, you'll see the password field, which has its own interactivity. It does things like the conditions checking and making sure you have the same password. It has it's telling, hey, use this namespace reset password, even though it does have its own interactivity. And I'll show you the code for this in a second.
Okay.
And then we come down further, and you'll see here that this password field isn't pointing to reset password. It's pointing to form input password, which is this block. So when you type in something here, this block is controlling the conditions and interactivity of it. However, this then sends information up to reset password, and then this sends information up to the user accounts controller, and so on and so forth, right? Okay. And so this is where kind of context really comes into play. So if we come to, let's just go make an account. Yada, yada, yada. Let me just type in some passwords, give it some, there we go, I'm at the conditions. I don't know what I typed, so it's not gonna be the same thing. Let me do this. Okay. And I think.
Quick question. While you're doing that, I don't want to interrupt your password generation, but I see the validation. Okay, so everything here is as you were explaining, and then you have this little TOS section at the bottom, right? For them to accept the terms right there, I imagine the terms are then within the context of the form, right?
Well, I mean, this is just a
not the terms, but the
so,
checkbox.
So I've entered a password here. Obviously, I need to have like some values and stuff, but you see sign up is disabled. So we've entered a value. We've entered values into form input password. Form input password has communicated back up to the user registration block, which encompasses all of this, and it's stored that password. And it said, hey, they can continue, but there's still one condition that needs to be met. We need to agree to the terms. So this is form input checkbox. It has state, and when you make a value change, it's going to communicate that back up to the login form. The CAPTCHA block has its own thing. It's run up to the higher value, and so on and so forth. But I actually need an email, right? So that kind of gives you an idea there of those communications, I think.
Yes.
And if you'll give me a second, I'll show you some code too to highlight this a little bit further.
Of course.
So let's just go to. So if we go to the controller here for all of the user account system, you'll kind of see it doesn't have a whole lot really. All that really controls is the user signed in, right? That's what all these other blocks need to know, is the user signed in. And if they're not, it needs to provide a simple function for them to sign in.
Okay.
So that's user controller, or the controller.
The the ones that goes around.
Yeah, the one that wraps all of these kind of user account blocks.
Okay.
And then let's go to the registration form. Oops. And here you'll see on the registration form, it is using context. So this was a matter of state is accessible globally, and you can lock it. That this is a functionality they added in the last couple of months. You can lock state. Originally, we couldn't do that. So there is kind of, I think, a security concerns that you should be aware of for state and context too, right? State, you could technically modify on the page. Context, you can't, because that's instanced to that block. Right. So here on the registration page, I don't want a malicious actor to be able to change these values when someone's trying to sign up for an account. So we've made these things context. Okay. So once again, there is no clear cut when you should use state, when you should use context. There's a lot of, I think, considerations for when you should use them. And they do different things. There's different feature sets for both. Like I said, state is a little bit more accessible. Context isn't. There's pros and cons to both of those. And then from here, the registration form, this is where a lot of our kind of click handlers and things, when a text field changes on the first name or last name, this is what's running on input change. When someone does click a checkbox like the agree to terms, you'll see if name is agree to terms, then a context agree to terms, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of see how those things connect. And then on the on password change, that's like the password form, the form input password block. It's here, I'll show you. Sometimes it's just easier to show the code than explain what's going on. Yeah. Because there's a lot going on here. Very helpful.
Yes.
So let's just. Sorry, let me go to the render. Okay. So, sorry, view. Here you'll see what happens on input change. You might have remembered just a second ago I showed you the registration form also has its own on input change handler. That's to handle all of its other text fields. This handles only the text field for what's inside of it.
Okay.
Okay. Does that make sense? So we've kind of standardized a set of names for these actions, and it's really go add your namespace to that block, and we're assuming obviously that the namespace block has an action ready for you, but they are kind of a standardized set of names.
Okay. So in this case, if you have like the password one that then goes into its own little thing, it will use this input change, not the other one, because you namespaced it locally.
Correct.
To the closest one. Okay.
And then down here, you'll see on value change. So the form input password block, it does this conditions checking, and it makes sure that you've duplicated your password correctly. Once you've met those conditions, we send the password value up to higher up, and that's what this is going. This was happening here. So on value change, we look and say, hey, is there a value? Great. If so, let's go into our target namespace store. Even though this has its own interactivity, we still need to hoist this value up. And if that store does have an on password change function itself, send a value there, right? And so that way, form input password has its own functionality to handle its logic. And then higher up, if the registration form needs to handle passwords differently, or a reset password form needs to handle passwords differently, they can, without affecting how the core, password block works, right? It only needs to do one thing. You put values into it, it checks it, and then it returns that value up. That's all it needs to do. And it's the other higher up blocks that determine, okay, well, now that I have the password, what do I do with it? Do I send it along somewhere? Do I store it temporarily? Whatever.
Right. Okay. So anytime you need to do anything related to a password, you can use that one.
Exactly like it's a React component.
Anywhere.
right?
Right.
We just drop that
Okay.
component in.
With all its functionality
Mm-hmm.
contained,
Mm-hmm.
and then the higher ups are going to be the ones that do the decision on what.
What to do with that value that you've now set.
Nice. Nice. And
So,
so in the context, right there, well, the namespace, I mean, right there, I saw you had the namespace as a parameter, right? So
mm-hmm.
instead of hard coding namespaces, you are receiving whatever you have in that field there so that these blocks are completely dynamic.
Yeah. And so namespace actually is one of those things that gets set on context to almost all of our blocks, because that
Mm-hmm.
is where on that instance, we want to say, in this instance, use this
On that one.
namespace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an attribute on all the blocks. Any block that has support interactivity set to true gets these attributes added programmatically.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, whatever you set there, that's what it's going to use.
Wow. That is That's a great way to handle it.
I
How
think so.
it's very different from the typical approach,
Mm-hmm.
and I like it because it's very logical.
It's flexible, but it's also
it's fl-
specific. You're not going to run
yes.
into an issue where, oh, I dropped a button block into this
Mm-hmm.
interactive application and it's doing something else entirely different. No, it's not. You're
Right.
saying exactly go do this on button click action inside of this other interactive store. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to worry about that inheritance kind of problem that you do kind of run into with this,
Mm-hmm.
because there is other ways to go about this. There are kind of ways that you can say add additional functions or override functions in stores. I just found this to be a little bit easier to follow, to know
Mm-hmm.
what exactly is going to happen when we drop a block somewhere.
Okay. And when you decided to follow this structure of creating the atomic block system, how how did that go about? Is it just like you just created a bunch of feel like HTML DOM elements with some supports and things like that, and then decided, okay, these are gonna be the
Mm-hmm.
blocks that we're gonna use everywhere, or
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of an iterative process. I mean, at
mm-hmm.
first we knew, okay, look, we need input text, we need a radio button, we need checkboxes, and those were kind of the first three. And once you make those three, well, we realized, oh, well, actually, checkbox and radio are the same thing. They're just a
Mm-hmm.
different visual treatment. So we made that into one block. Input
Okay.
checkbox, it has a style radio. um, Same thing for text. You're like, oh, well, text area is the same thing as text, effectively, so
Mm-hmm.
on and so forth. And so we just made that input text and has a couple different styles you can choose from. So yeah, at first we started with kind of like I would call them the most primitive kind of HTML form elements,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there more complex things. A selectable dropdown.
Uh-huh.
That one was actually quite technically hard. That took months of rewrites and trying different approaches to get that to work. Uh, you saw form input password.
Mm-hmm.
That one we're going to break out a little bit further because it does have that kind of conditions checker thing off to the side there. To
Mm-hmm.
me, that seems like that could be its own interactive block with its own settings. You go in there, you set what the
Right.
conditions are, and yada yada yada, and then you could drop that
Mm-hmm.
into form input password, but you could also drop that somewhere else. I could see
Mm-hmm.
that being used elsewhere. So it really starts off with you make a block. I think you make an interactive block, you make a full application of what you want to do. Maybe you make a full form, and then you start abstracting away. And you say, well, what can be atomic here? What's reused? And break it down to its most simplest form and make interactive blocks from those.
That's smart. Is this? Do you think this is just for something like forms, or do you see this type of design system used in other
Oh, oh yes,
types of?
oh yes. Um, like I said, I really look at these like React components. We really heavily used semantic UI React for years, all throughout the site, modals, forms, you name it. And I see this as the replacement for that. I will show you something besides a form,
Mm-hmm.
actually. So let's take a look at, let's see if this is going to work today. um, Okay, so another kind of component to the user account system for us is data sets. These kind of our bread and butter. They're really important to us. And we want to be able to track who's downloading this, who's using our data, and other things.
Okay.
So you'll see here. Let me just open the template for this so you can see how this is working. Okay, so in the sidebar here, I have a block called Content Gate. Should be self-explanatory what that does. If a user's logged in, they see what's inside of this block. If they're not logged in, they don't see anything. Or in this case, we do have a little toggle here that says if they're not logged in, display a login form.
Okay.
Now the login form isn't managed here. That's actually like a pattern. It's just this. Once again, It's blocks. It is the login form block. Like I showed you with all these different sub blocks and things. So that's kind of hard coded as a pattern, and then we just call it in when you're not logged in.
Okay.
But inside this content gate is a dataset download block. This is using core button with our interactivity stuff. You'll see here it's saying the namespace is dataset download.
Now, so it's the same button, but you
button.
just placed it inside the dataset download block that does something specific.
Correct. So you can imagine how useful that is, right? I mean, if why build a bunch of different buttons that do one specific thing? It's one button block, and it's styled a very specific way. Maybe we have some, we don't have a lot of very stylized buttons. Pew Research is pretty basic, but you could imagine there's a lot of different pre-built styles that you might have that you want to maintain. And so now I dropped it into something, and now it does something different. I could drop it somewhere else. It does something different, and all by setting the namespace. So here on this page, we got the content gate. That's an interactive block. We got the dataset download. That's an interactive block. And when I log in, you give me a moment. Whoops. Where's my password manager so I can open that example? Okay. External account. All right. So let me log in here real quick.
Why create a download dataset one specific to the dataset? I know this one's really important, and that's probably why, but versus having like a download file generic one that's used for many things.
Well, that's because this is a very specific use application. When you click this, we do a couple things. You'll see here, this is the American Trends panel, and I probably should have signed it with a different account. All products, all of our ATP dataset products require you to agree to legal terms before downloading them. Other datasets, you don't need to agree to legal terms. So when you click this button, we check, have you agreed? Is this an ATP dataset? Have you agreed to the legal terms? If not, throw up a modal with a form for you to accept those legal terms. And give me another moment, and I will tell the account system that I have not agreed to those terms, and I can show you what that looks like.
Excellent, of course.
Let me stop the screen sharing real quick. Go to okay, ATP, not true. All right. And let's go back into this. Whoops. Okay, so now I've told it that I have not agreed to legal terms. So when I click this, if my local is working correctly, we should see a pop-up or not, because it still thinks I've accepted the legal terms. Well, suffice to say, what's supposed to happen here is because I've not accepted legal terms is a modal is supposed to pop up.
Okay.
That too is a block. And I think I can show you an example of that.
Is the modal being a modal a block and then it just contains whatever you want, or is it a specific
Yeah,
modal block for the data set?
it's just a modal, and in its content has a very specific dataset download legal
Nice.
acceptance block. So there's actually one of these we just did that has a bunch of modals I can show you. Oops, that one I think. Yeah, okay. So here are even more interactive blocks. Here you see this is this quote block, the media text block, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And wrapping this image is our pop-up controller block. So we
Okay.
use this in forms. We use this in content. Here you go, you see. This is pop-up video.
Okay.
Inside here is the content, which is just, a media text with some text and an image. And then there's the
Okay.
actual modal, which I'm going to open here. And inside there is a video press
Okay.
block. In the ATP thing, this is an ATP legal form block. And let me actually go back so you can see that in action.
So you can apply this pop-up video to anything. Like you can have an image, you can have a figure, you can have whatever. But if it's inside that, then you can also have a modal within it that when you click it, it does that instead of, okay, that's pretty neat.
And so I wish I could get the demo working for you. Well, I can probably show you the code too to give you an illustration of that.
Sure.
Let's say, download block, here we go. And so we're doing something, we use blocks in the editor, we use blocks hard-coded. So here you'll see, if this is ATP, then we need a modal. And so we have a little PHP function we've created that will just create the block markup for the pop-up controller. And you'll see here, we can pass in block markup to the content, and that all gets rendered. And we're just passing in this dataset ATP legal acceptance block. And let me come over to the view. You can see here's that block. It's pretty simple. It's just you click accept. It's a REST endpoint. It sends all your user info that we need and sets that you've accepted that thing. So it's not just input blocks. It's a whole suite of interactive blocks. There's modal blocks, there's accordions, there's tabs, and all of them can work with each other. So you saw there, we had a little block that you signed up for, you log in, that then changes the state of the block, and now it's a download block. And then when you click this, if it is an ATP, it throws up a pop-up modal block, and they're all interactive and communicating with each other.
That's so great. So you can have any combination of what we've talked about within each other. So you maybe have like an accordion type view with a multi-step form that could work together because it's just the forms, it's just the form fields and the state, and you can, that is so cool. That's a great way to handle things.
Yeah.
That's again different than
you build the modal once, right? You build the modal once, and if you do it well enough, that's it. Now you can use that modal block everywhere, programmatically via PHP or in the block editor, however you want to use it. It's very versatile.
That's great. So even like if like your gated content is great, that example, because learning management systems or video platforms, right? They want to have the option to have the video that's there always, but it's locked. You have to be registered or you have to have a certain tier, but then maybe you want it to sometimes be free or be available, right? But you could just always just wrap it within the correct container, And based on that, not only the video, but everything else that you want can be conditional, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, a long time ago, it's funny you say, very long time ago, I built one of the first learning management systems on WordPress decades ago now.
Nice.
And, I imagine today if I was building a learning management system with blocks, that would be great, right? You have a content gate and you could conceivably wrap this in the site editor too. You could make
Mm-hmm.
whole templates use this, right? You get a template if you get this version of the template if you're logged in. You get an entirely different version of the template if you're not logged in. You could do a lot with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I think it if you were to do a learning management system, it would be completely different than how they're structured now. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
look at LearnDash or Lifter or anything like that, they work, but it's a little cumbersome to work with, and everything is in the back end, and it's very different from what you're seeing. We talked about this briefly last time, compared to what you showed me in like creating your quizzes and everything right there. Yeah, it would be a completely reimagined experience for working with the actual thing, and even like how you work with progress within the courses and the
Mm-hmm.
content. And now with interactivity, you could very easily have it where as people advance, you're
You
keeping
share that
tabs on
progress
it.
across,
You
yeah,
share that
across all
progress
your
across.
blocks. Mm-hmm.
You could be watching a video, go look at the syllabus somewhere else, and the video can keep playing, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
do all sorts
Yeah,
of,
you could just do so many things.
yeah, this is so great. This is so great. So last time you talked about the tables and the charts.
Mm-hmm.
And this brought up a question, many questions, really. But a big question is, you said you were using, what was the name? WP? No, it was table something. I don't remember the name, but you were using a table block, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That exists to sort of lay out the data, and then you had your charting
Mm-hmm.
tools, internal tools that actually do the chart. And so, considering the interactivity API, how would one do it there to where what's done in the table, which might be a separate block than what you're using to control the chart, right? How does the chart get the information of the block, especially if you're using third-party tools,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That is block context, server-side
Okay.
block context. I mean, well, there is client-side block context as well, obviously, in the editor, but that is
Mm-hmm.
all block context. We use that. I mean, I can explain a little bit how that works. Let me.
Oh, so the way you get attributes, for example, from a block, right?
Yeah.
That's contained in the block itself. So then,
So let's pull open a.
is it is it similar in that sense where you can programmatically get access to it?
Yes. So let me show you this. Let's just take a look at this one. Probably has some good charts. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so this is chart builder. This is all blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that this works is once it gets done loading, we have the table block, we have the chart builder
Mm-hmm.
block.
Okay.
Basically, what happens is when you make value changes here, they get
Mm-hmm.
communicated to the chart builder controller block, and then
The line chart is the
yeah, that's
controller.
the controller. So we have so for every type of chart, we've made a variation on our controller block,
Okay.
line, pie, area, bar, whatever, to make it easy to
Mm-hmm.
quickly create one. Um, this is what contains all the data, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it communicates that down to chart builder, which is kind of the visual layer. And this is where how all these settings for the visual side of things
Mm-hmm.
live.
Colors and all
Colors,
that.
keys, padding, all that stuff. That
Okay.
lives here on the chart builder block itself, and then the controller is what tells chart builder here's the data you should use. The table is really just an interface to edit the data.
Okay.
Well, and display it a little bit on the front end, but for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
this is just to edit the information. So when we come here, the controller block says use the chart builder block first, and
Hmm.
then put the table block in.
Oh, it does show the table.
We do show the table, so put that here in this data tab. Um, so that one's pretty simple, actually. I mean, it's very complex what it's doing, but like its structure is actually pretty simple.
But it's interesting. So you could have, in theory, any type of table block because the data contained within
Yeah.
it, if it's done properly, it's there in the block, right?
You don't need a table block at all, really.
Okay.
That's, I think, kind of the best part of this. So to show you
So you just need the data reference.
the data
So
into the chart builder controller.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it could
So
be
you can
just a
pass an array.
JSON object or an array, and
Yeah,
that's it.
do-
Or like you were doing here, using a table. So, but in this case, is that table a table that's built by your team, or is it like a third, like just a table that exists?
So for that
and are
table,
you hooking into it?
Yeah, for that one instance of that chart, what you just saw there, that was an editor who went in and built that table. I mean, probably it was a CSV delivered by one of the researchers, and they just dragged and dropped it in there. So it's not like a lot of editing. But then when we come over to here, you'll see this very big database product that we have. This is not blockified yet. That is going to happen later this year. But a lot of this is just PHP. Even so, what you're seeing here is our tabs block being programmatically built with PHP and then rendered as a block. This is Chart Builder. It's not the same table. You see there's a little bit of a different interface, but this is the Chart Builder block. And we're just passing in data from this database in programmatically for this selection, and it builds the chart. So that way we can use Chart Builder editorially and content, but also like a component, we can use it programmatically wherever we need.
Oh, okay. So you could put in something else as the source that goes and fetches from your data warehouse or whatever and pulls it in. It doesn't have to be the localized table that's there.
Correct.
And then I saw you had something called synced charts.
Oh yeah. Let me share that again. This one, we do a lot of these, and this is actually something I'm surprised by because I just have not seen really anybody else in the WordPress space pick up on this. The entity system in WordPress is exceptionally powerful and actually very easy to use. So this block, we've got our chart builder controller, and it's contained in this synced chart block.
Okay.
What this is, it's template part. It's reusable block.
Okay.
All it is it pulls in a specific post type and reference a post ID, and it pulls in the contents of that post as blocks, and then lets you edit those. So you've seen this before, right? Let's say we change a value here, and you go to click save. Oh, what's that? You've seen this before. You've seen this whenever you make a change to a pattern or whenever you make a change to the template part. This is WordPress entities, and so we've said use this post type chart and what the ID is, and so it's letting you know, hey, you've made a change here. Do you want to save that? What that lets us do, obviously, is it lets us put the chart in multiple places at once and edit it from multiple places all at once. So there's kind of one universal source of truth for that chart. So
are these charts? I'm sorry. Go
ahead.
Are these charts a post?
Yes.
Like once this is created, there's the A chart, right?
Yeah.
And you can use it somewhere else.
So if we open up the code here view,
it's not just a block.
It's
reference to an actual post.
Yeah.
In the
all
database.
That is in this post is just this chart block with a reference. That's it. It's the actual chart post where this chart lives. So if I click on this, we have a nice little handy dandy open a new window. So this will open up just that chart. And if I want to, I could go edit this kind of on its own, kind of separate. We'll let that load here so you can see that. So here's just the chart, right? And any changes I make here. So
this is the post of the chart, which has this. And then when you're seeing it over there, you're just seeing the contents of this post there.
Now what's great is because it's using entity, the entity system, this is all ready to go for real-time collaboration. That means I can have editors here or designers making a chart. That is their job, after all, to be making charts. They can come in here and really fine-tune these charts, while I can have editors in here writing content, doing whatever, and those values will change in real time. Now, obviously, that's not ready to
Ooh.
go today.
Right.
WordPress Sync
But
isn't live for everybody. You can turn it on and you can kind of see that in action in a rough way. But you'll see I edited the chart a little bit.
mm-hmm.
We have a little less value here. So when we come over here, we see that value's dipped. And I didn't need to load in the chart or something. It's just pulling it in automatically.
This is so great.
So we do that
Oh
throughout
my
the
God.
system. We do that for
Mm-hmm.
charts. We do that for quizzes so that you can, a quiz lives on its own, but you could, if you want to
Mm.
embed that in a post. We do that with all of our kind of content types.
Okay. So you could, are these all, do these always have to be a post, or can you create a little chart that's just an instance right there
Yeah. No, you can make,
for that block?
I could drop in just a chart here. It's just a chart block. It doesn't get saved anywhere else except just this
Uh-huh.
one instance. Yeah.
Okay. But when you want
Yeah.
to reuse it, okay.
But the main entry point is the main entry point is the sync chart, right? Go look for a chart, or maybe I need to make a new chart.
Okay. Okay. So you create
Test
it
chart.
there.
Yeah, and I say, what kind of
Perfect.
chart it is. Let's just say it's
Mm-hmm.
a column chart. It's going to go
So that
make
will
that.
create a new post that contains that pattern
Mm-hmm.
of the table with the pie chart or column chart,
Yeah, the column chart.
and
Yep.
then embed that in here.
Yep. So here we
Wow.
go. We've got it's went and made a chart post, called it Seth's test chart. And because I selected column chart, we drop in a template to get started. So it's got the column chart and the table, some simple settings.
Wow. And that's using the entity system.
Yep, that is using use entity records and use entity props.
This is great. Yeah, I have not heard about the entity system except from you last time.
I know.
I think
It
it
drives me
is
crazy.
not
People need to be
represented
using it.
properly. Yeah. It's like the interactivity API. Nobody was talking about it, and they started to talk about it, and then nobody got it still, and then they're sort of getting it now. I'm among those. It's I think the entity system is going to be great.
Oh yeah. I mean, if I
These.
can geek out on anything for you all for one more minute, it is the entity system. I would say, look, if you're looking for a complex concept to dive into, do this before you do the interactivity API. The entity system is gonna just open you up to do so many cool things, just so many more powerful things that you just couldn't do before.
Yeah. How does one learn about the entity system? Where should we?
Honestly, the WordPress dev blog, there are some great examples on there on using the entity system. There's some great examples on using it for getting post meta from a post and
Mm-hmm.
changing values. There's also some good examples on there on how to query a bunch of posts using entity records. And then lastly, just look at the source code for template part
Mm-hmm.
or pattern block in the Gutenberg GitHub repo.
Okay.
Um,
Because they're using that.
it's a few lines of code to get started with entities. Really, it's very simple. People just haven't
And
done it.
yeah, I'm looking at the docs here. I'm going to link them in the video. But I see, so you can query a post of a certain post type
You can query by post
with
type and some
it.
arguments, or by specific post ID. It uses almost all the things you would expect from WP Query.
So why use WP query at all?
Well,
Like
really,
in this context.
this is, I'm sure someone will chastise me for saying this on the Gutenberg team, but this is WP Query for the editor. Use entity records as WP Query for the block editor and site editor. That's what it really comes down to.
Okay. Okay. So this is a better way, or might be a better way to do it, if you are in this space of building interactive experiences in the editor.
Mm-hmm.
This is so cool. I will definitely look into it, and we'll have to talk more
For sure.
about
For
entities
sure.
and how they work. I'll try to get some code going for it.
We have a lot of other cool things that are not even live right now that we're just waiting on WordPress Sync to launch.
Nice.
One of them is one of my favorite things that I worked on the last year was we have editor panel that shows, we have reports, and they might have sub chapters, which are just other posts that kind of get associated with that. And with the entity system, it's great because when the WordPress sync is live, I can have all these different posts open, and that sidebar panel will be changing across all the posts as I'm updating it in one post, because they share that information. And that's just one, I think, really cool use case beyond just like putting stuff in the editor. It's the entire interface can use this WordPress sync system and entities to achieve real-time collaboration.
Is this, so would you do, I don't know if you're doing it now, but in the future then, would you do it for, let's say, figures as well? Like figures on a document, images in a publication. Is it better to do it that way instead of like, oh, I just put an image here? It's better to just have it as its own thing and reference it.
Yeah, so I wish images used it this way. There is obviously a little bit of a performance overhead because you are doing a query, right? So when we load the page, we do have to query charts and say, get this chart. So I definitely think for images, it makes sense to statically put those in the post that they're in. But yeah, I mean, you could, if that's something that you need to do, right? Like you have a central kind of store of images and you're going to use them in a lot of different places multiple times. We don't do that. The images we upload that's for that one post.
That's for that. Okay.
Yeah. Whereas things like charts and quizzes that we do share across posts.
That makes sense.
So, but if you had an image library situation where you were using images a lot, I think that making kind of a little entity wrapper block for that would be very useful, because that way you edit once, propagates everywhere, right?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, mostly because I'm just thinking like Pew Research, it's a publication, right? You have all these, and then you have, well, you're using attachments, right? That's why you have an attachment page. That's the way you alternatively show the image.
Weird people that use an actual attachment template. Yeah, most people I think kind of just
there.
skip attachments. But yeah, we actually have an actual attachments template, so we drive people to that.
That makes sense. Okay.
So that way, if we edit the image, we can just say, hey, you have the link to the attachment page, go there,
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Well, this is great.
I'm glad.
So
I'm
much.
glad you found it
There's
interesting.
so many more questions popped into my head, but I don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate the time, Seth, to go over this with me again in more detail. I hope we can talk more about entities and other fun stuff a little ways down the road. But again, congratulations on everything you're doing on Pew Research. This is a fantastic way to handle things, and I think a lot of eyes are going to be open to how one can streamline the editing process, keep everything in-house, don't have to depend on so many of these form plugins, which sometimes you need to, it's fine. But if you have the talent and the resources and you can just build these, because sometimes it's just a form that you're going to reuse everywhere. You don't need all the bells and whistles. You just need that, right? And so a lot of these things can just come into your own code base and make everything safer, more secure, more performant, which is a big thing in the WordPress space. So thank you so much.
One more thing.
Yes.
As a leader of other developers, if that's your role, this approach will save you. This helps you scale up your development efforts as a team. You're not repeating yourself, and you kind of have structure to your blocks, to your applications. Kind of gives you a path forward of how we're going to structure things. So if you're a leader of a dev team, I would suggest that you kind of take this atomic block approach. It will save you a lot of headache down the road.
Oh, yeah. Hooking into that, how do you manage the documentation for all of these? Do you have like a storybook kind of deal, or
WordPress.
is it?
We have a little sub-site called DevDocs on our main site, and you just go. We have site editors, so we've made a nice little documentation site, and you go write release notes and DevDocs in there.
Nice.
Of course, the solution is WordPress.
Yeah, well, but it's the correct way to do it. I think a lot of people ask when working with clients and things like that, like, should I use WordPress or something else? And most of the time the answer is, well, it depends, of course. But
it depends.
If you're doing something, what I would say before, is if you're doing something that you're using 50% of WordPress or 60% or 70%, and you're just tweaking some things to make it work to what your use case is, then perfect. Use WordPress. Don't use anything else. If 80% of what you're doing is
Oh yeah,
custom and it's not what WordPress is supposed to do, don't use WordPress,
yeah,
because
yeah.
you'll get it. You're still gonna custom code everything. Just build a React
Right.
application or Laravel or whatever you want to do. But it's coming to a point with all these things where I'm like, oh, okay, we have to start looking at some new, very interesting use cases for WordPress,
Yeah.
because
There's
now
a
we
very
have
big
the
toolbox
option
here.
of, yes, you're saving
There's a very
yourself
big
the
toolbox.
hassle of authentication, authorization,
Mm-hmm.
roles. We've got the databases. You can create your own tables, which you should for a lot of things, and you can,
Asset
with the
loading. That's the
interactivity
biggest one.
API, asset load.
I
Yeah,
mean, you know,
yeah.
how many times do you hit a web page and they're loading every single component and everything that they need, where with this, you only load the
Mm-hmm.
tabs code when tabs are on the page. You only load the video player code when the video is on the page. Um,
Yes.
that
Yes.
to me, that was one of the first things with blocks. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like this
Mm-hmm.
solves so much trouble.
CSS.
Yeah, like you only load the CSS and
Yeah.
assets that you need on the page. Like that's huge.
It is. That's one of the big ones for me too,
Mm-hmm.
because all these you needed to get another plugin to get rid of all the code that all the other plugins are loading in every single page load and all the libraries and everything. So with this,
Well, and even if you're going to make a React application, you need to figure that stuff out
yeah,
yourself too.
yeah,
WordPress just takes care of all that now for you.
does it for you. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. This has been great. I really appreciate it, Seth, and we'll look forward to another conversation about any of
Same. I
these
look forward to
soon.
talking with you again. Thank you for
All
having me.
right. Oh, where can people find you, Seth? If because I know you're
Uh,
very active in the
Twitter.
community as
Twitter's
well.
a good
Twitter.
place. I'm at Twitter at Seth Rubenstein, so you can find me there. And I post stuff all the time about little crazy ideas I'm working on WordPress. Some of them never see the light of day, but some of them are interesting.
Excellent. All right, I'll link that in the video notes as well. Thanks
All
so
right.
much, Seth.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.